Thank you, Jim, for hitting that recording button. I'm Sam Albrecht. I'm the director of the Office of Regulatory Oversight, which was Mo's position. Mo will be here about 11 o'clock, but I'm going to kick us off and get us started. I believe I have all the TAC members promoted to panelists. The attendees, you should be able to hear. You should be able to raise your hand if you want to speak, and you should be able to chat in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on both the panelist and attendee list and also on the chat box if anybody wants to mention. Brian, you should be able to do both of those things. I know that you were might have had some technical difficulty, but I show you as in. So we should be good to go. We have a fairly light, no, we have a few items on the agenda for today. I won't call them light. This is the big discussion. We're going to do a quick round of introductions again for those folks that were not able to participate in the last week or 2 weeks ago. We'll jump into construction standards for tiny home industry, and then we will wrap up, and then we have an executive session at 1 o'clock where we will talk about open records requests and public meeting law and some of those exciting things. So we have to be done no later than 1 o'clock with this general discussion on standards. We've asked, so let's do the introductions again. You got me. Donnie, you want to introduce yourself? And I know you may have to bounce out in just a second.
Yeah, so my name is Donnie Feathern. I'm the program manager for the Division of Housing, Building Codes and Standards section. I oversee all of the manufactured structures that are produced for the state of Colorado and also produced within the state of Colorado that will remain in the state of Colorado. So we oversee the plan reviews, also the inspections and the registration of sellers, manufacturers, installers, and third-party independent inspectors.
And that's the only staff person on other than myself, and Mo, like I said, will be joining us. Just to kind of give you an update, we did bring on a new person also. We're getting her up to speed as a program coordinator, and then we are moving forward with hiring some more staff as soon as we work through the state HR system. So if any of you are on by phone, the way Zoom works, *6 mutes you, and *6 then unmutes you. *9 allows you to raise your hand, and then I think another *9 will allow you to lower your hand. With that, any questions? Let's go around real quick and let the panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to call you out as I see you on my screen. Nate, you want to go first?
Hey guys, Nate Peterson. I probably fill the role of installer and dealer on the TAC. I've been on the TAC for about 10 years or so, and also am very involved in affordable housing on the board of Colorado Housing and Finance Authority.
Great, thank you. John?
I'm John McGee. I'm a plumbing board inspector supervisor right now for the state. There's 2 of us now. I was the only one on the job for last 3 years, but now we have another supervisor as well. We have 12 inspectors in the state currently. We do 39 counties. All the inspections, we're responsible for schools, all public schools and state buildings. We also work to set the Colorado plumbing and fuel gas codes for the state of Colorado.
Thanks, John. Tim?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Tim Pate, I'm the chief building official with the city and county of Broomfield. And so I guess I play one of the chief building official roles on the group. Good morning.
Good morning. James McLean, Arapahoe County.
Yes, sir. My name is James McLean. I'm the Arapahoe County's operations manager. I help manage all the structural, plumbing, and electrical inspections, and also mechanical.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Janine?
Janine Snyder, Park County Building Department, Senior Building Inspector, Plans Examiner.
Great. Justin Flucky is also on the line, but I think his, yeah, he just chatted. He's structural engineer licensed in Colorado and 45 other jurisdictions. Joined TAC about 3 years ago. He is Michaelis today, so we'll keep an eye on the chat box for him. Robin, you asked a question, but you're actually not on the TAC, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, great. And then Tracy?
Hi, everybody. My name is Tracy Manchego Baker. I'm with Tiny Building Experts out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I'm here on the TAC team supporting the tiny house industry. We have a small business out here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and just really, partner working with lots of builders across the US and including multiple builders here in Colorado. So just supporting the tiny house industry and representing.
Great, thank you. John Meyer?
Hey, good morning, everyone. John Meyer with Heritage Homes in Northeast Nebraska. Minority owner here at Heritage, vice president. Been active in Colorado for the last 11 years and as my role at Heritage.
Thanks, John. Sean?
Yeah, I'm Sean Roos, Clayton Homes in Grand Junction, Colorado. Been in the industry since 1984. Been with Clayton for about 10 years, had my own independent company prior to that. Also licensed GC. Hope everybody's doing well.
Thank you. And I will mess up your name. Is it Sumit?
It's Sumit.
Sumit, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, my name is Sumit Santankar. I am the I work for a company called Custom and Instrumentation Services Corporation. We build small equipment buildings, SEMSTAT structures for power plants and the like. So I basically represent a lot of the commercial building industry in that kind of area. I do quality work for this company. So
Great, thank you so much for joining. All right, so we're gonna get started with the agenda. I see any of the other panelists or TAC members pop into the attendee list first, and then I move them over. But I don't see anybody else outstanding at this point in time. If there's any other questions for anybody, again, raise your hand and I'll get to you just as quick as I can. But we're going to start this meeting off with Tracy. She's going to kind of give us an overview. Let me see if I can pull that screen up. Bear with me just a second. There we go. Can you guys see that screen? Not yet, probably. Nope, I have to click the share button. There we go. Can you guys see that now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Tracy, is that one of your units?
Yeah, actually, that is a 24-foot by 8-foot tiny house on a engineered trailer foundation by Trailer Made out of Olathe, Colorado. The house was built by Tiny Building Experts out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And this tiny house actually is one of the first tiny houses that went into a approved tiny house community here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, El Paso County, in the downtown area for disadvantaged youth. We have 18 units going into a community, and this is one of them.
Great. So we've asked Tracy to kind of give us an overview, and I expect this to be a robust discussion. And Tracy's prepared herself for that too, I believe. So again, we talked at the last meeting about tackling the construction standards to start with. and as a group. And then if we want to talk about at the end of this meeting during wrap up, splitting that up into smaller pieces, then let's talk about doing that.
So yeah, Mo and Sam said, let's have this discussion. Obviously, this is not an all-inclusive list. This was just to kind of get the conversation started and get everybody engaged about, well, what is the current landscape? So what's currently out there right now? And in the tiny house industry, you will notice that most of the tiny house builders that are striving to do things, the right ways, are building to the NFPA 1192 for your standard 8 and 8.6 units. For those of those not familiar, according to Department of Transportation nationwide, we are allowed to go to 102 inches, which is 8 feet 6 inches. And you do not need a permit to pull that unit out on the highway. It does have to be licensed and titled. It does have a VIN. And of course, we are building on adequate trailers that are handling, 12,000 pounds, for example. The trailers or the chassis are sized based off of the unit of the house or the square footage of the house, your weight. The next one, I see a lot of builders across the United States, especially as well as in Colorado, building to is the ANSI code 119.5. We're seeing that being utilized for the 10 wide units, 10 wide plus, right? We are seeing people build on 12 wide trailers as well. These units are still built on a chassis or a trailer, and all while staying under the HUD 400 square feet rule. So you do see multiple builders building to, this standard as well. And then the other one that we see in the tiny house industry where we really see, really great builders striving to really meet IRC. And so with a few slight modifications, that we as a team have discussed and as an industry we've discussed and kind of hammered this out, from insulation to, where is it do we fall short when it comes to IRC? When it comes to the foundation builds, they fall to IRC, minimum square footage apply, standard permitting, et cetera. We do have some jurisdictions here in Colorado that have approved Appendix Q, but we also have many jurisdictions in Colorado that have not approved Appendix Q and don't plan to, or AQ for that matter. To give you guys an example, Teller County, for one, is currently using IRC 2015. While they may be going to 2018, they are choosing not to adopt Appendix Q. Therefore, no tiny houses allowed in their county. So, those are the three main codes we see being utilized across the industry right now. I'm not saying this is all inclusive. And then unfortunately, you do have folks out there that are not probably using these codes, which is, a consumer issue for all of us as far as wanting to, protect this industry and the consumers. The last bullet point I have on there is the ASTM standards. That is currently, there is a committee being formed right now. I know that they have invited the TAC as they are starting to develop standards for throws. Anytime you guys hear us use that acronym of a throw, it's really just a tiny house on wheel. Okay. So that's what we see being used right now. I don't know if anybody in the modular industry or if anybody else wanted to kind of chime in and see, kind of what is missing from this list of, maybe what they're all seeing tiny houses being built to and inspected to.
Good point, Tracy. If anybody wants to kind of comment or provide a little more information, just raise your hand and I'll let you talk.
Sam, did you see the commentary from Brad about the
I did see some
ICC?
commentary from Brad. Brad, you want to talk about that? I can figure out how to do that. Brad, I've allowed you to talk, apparently. You want to kind of go over what you wrote in the chat?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm not the world's greatest speaker, so please bear with me. But the ICC has published a comprehensive resource covering all of the relevant building codes and standards for the construction of tiny homes. And it's known as the ITHP, the International Tiny Home Provisions. It includes the entire IRC, along with Appendix AQ. Appendix AQ being what Appendix Q became in the 2021 printing of the IRC. It's still the appendix that covers tiny homes. But in the case of the ITHP, they have actually embedded those provisions into the body of the IRC so that you can see exactly how it relates to other provisions of the IRC. And so it gives additional context. It also has commentary on the intent and the implementation of the Appendix AQ as embedded into the body of the IRC. It also contains the entire text of the HUD code. It discusses there's a decision tree in there that shows how you determine which codes and standards or standards are relevant to your particular bill. So it truly is a comprehensive resource. The only thing it doesn't have in it is the full text of NFPA 1192 and ANSI 119.5 because they were not able to obtain the rights to reprint that within the context of this document. However, there are references within the document that tell when those other standards may be relevant. So I would encourage anyone who has a material interest in this to obtain a copy of this document and read through it. It's a long document because it does have so much information, and it's 2,332 pages. But it truly is a comprehensive resource for everything tiny house. And I think that when you start looking at this, you'll realize that standards and building codes for tiny houses are already comprehensively covered with this resource.
Good. Thank you, Brad, for that. Robin, I think you popped your hand up next.
Yes, thank you, Sam. Robin Butler with NOAA, and I have talked with Eric Freed about the what Brad talked about, and I've also been involved with IRC and the other NFPA 1192 and ANSI 119.5. And the challenges that I see with utilizing IRC as the standard for tiny houses on wheels, number one is there's no prescriptive standard or code for using a chassis as a floor system in IRC. There's wood, there's concrete, but there's nothing prescriptive using the chassis as the floor system. And in the HUD standard, obviously a 10-inch I-beam is not going to work when you're fighting heights in tiny houses. And there's nothing in there showing how to create a foundation for this chassis floor system. Those are two of the issues that I would have with IRC. And the final one would be with the Appendix AQ. When you're fighting loft height, trying to get enough room in your loft, you have a maximum height of 13.6 for going over the roads. And the chassis, even if you use a drop axle, is going to be 22 inches. So to get the the distance from the top landing, according to Appendix AQ, and still have the 6 foot 2 inches from the top of the landing, and also the 18 inches to crawl into the loft, just doesn't work in a tiny house on wheels. So I think, in my opinion, anyway, IRC as it stands right now isn't sufficient. And the next code change is going to be 2027. And if something was to be written in there to change all of that, that's fine. But I think we need something before then. So I'm kind of throwing my weight behind the ASTM Standards Committee and hoping that they will draw up something sufficient. We're currently using, for our inspection of tiny houses on wheels, we're currently using what's called we're calling a NOAA Plus standard, where we take the RV standard and add to it some structural and energy guidelines to make it more suitable for full-time habitation, even though it's not delineated to do that.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Those are some good points. And I don't want to go too far off of Tracy's list, but yeah, pros and cons of each. I think you did a good job of covering that. I do want to get a ASTM update, and I know, Mike, that you posted something in the chat too. But Eric, you've got your hands up next, and then I've got a TAC member I need to bounce to, and then Mike, maybe you want to talk to ASTM update, or somebody else is going to. Eric, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So I was going to chime in along with Robin. I think the IRC is a good start, but it doesn't really cover everything. And I've actually purchased and read the 2,000-page International Tiny House Standard. And it's interesting when you look at, basically they reprinted the entire IRC and pasted the tiny house provisions from Appendix Q into, but it only goes into chapters 1, 2, 3, and 11, which emphasizes that I believe those are the only places where tiny house Appendix Q or AQ modifies the IRC. So yeah, I think the IRC is maybe a good basis to start. You can certainly build everything from the chassis up using the rules in the IRC for walls and floors and ceilings. I think the chassis there's nothing in the IRC about chassis. There's nothing about the kind of foundation systems we're probably going to need. The other areas I see a problem with the IRC is the energy section. It pretty much closes off the prescriptive energy compliance path as far as I can see, because it says you can use that, but you also have to get 90% of your power from solar or wind, which not every tiny house is going to. And there's IRC section R307, which is fixture clearances in bathrooms, which I don't think works very well, and also minimum sizes for showers. So I think you could use the IRC as a one good starting point, but there are some gaps in there that, the matrix that's in that book that Brad referenced basically tells you either have to build it to the IRC or go through the HUD code. And I think there's just some gaps in between that we're gonna have to fill in to make it work for tiny houses.
Eric, I don't disagree. We have to come up with something that we can fully implement by July 1, which really backs us up to about March to get it through legal review and and everything else to get rules published. So what we're going to have to do is probably pick and choose and what we think is going to be best for Colorado at this point in time. And then the other piece of that is we do have a separate major issue to talk about is foundations and how we're going to do those. And then, yeah, if the ICC standard doesn't, the foundation piece isn't discussed, then that's something that we're going to have to either come up with our own and see how we can blend these things together. In my opinion, and I'm not a code expert, you guys are, but we're going to have to figure out what's going to work for Colorado by the end of March or so. Somebody else has their hand up. Sean?
Yeah, kind of talking about IRC and chassis. We've sold designs and had homes built, IRC code homes built with frame on. So that is definitely doable within the IRC code. Your challenges with HUD code, I would say the biggest single challenge is the 400 square foot minimum or minimum that would need to be accomplished before you can move into, before it would move under that code. So, typically these are smaller than that. So, once they reach 400 square foot, HUD code could apply, but anything smaller than that just isn't going to apply.
We have a new contact at HUD. We can reach out and see if they're thinking about doing anything, but my guess is the feds are going to move a little slower than industry and state. We'll have to figure out where they want to play. Thank you, Sean. Mike, did you want to come online and give us you threw out the ASTM page on the chat? Let me see if I can find your voice. Mike, can you chat now or talk now?
Yeah, there it is. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, I posted in a couple of the links from the ASTM International page that shows the EO6 performance of buildings, and then the actual specific subcommittee number 26, which is the tiny house subcommittee that we now have. And then I think I put in a quick blurb on the press release announcement that went out about a week ago. Basically, this model opportunity for us to really develop some serious voluntary consensus standards over a broad base of these 5 core areas that we've been talking about for well over 18 months. And again, we've got over 180 stakeholders worldwide that have been involved in this process. And basically, we're focusing on that tiny house on wheels standard. We're looking at tiny houses on foundations, but not as trying to compete with the Appendix Q or AQ. We're really trying to come up with a kind of a flexible foundation model where the tiny houses can be built on structures that can be attached to trailers and or be attached to innovative new foundation mounts. Because again, concrete slabs isn't the only game in town, and we obviously need to be looking at some alternative foundation models. So that's one of the areas of our foundation focus, is to give buyers and owners of tiny houses the ability of moving their and transitioning their house from a wheeled environment to a fixed environment, and potentially back in the other direction. I know this is probably going to be a stretch for a lot of local jurisdictions to kind of deal with that on a zoning basis, but we've got to at least start somewhere. And then obviously the focus on certification and inspections. Robin's here from NOAA, trying to get a head start on some things that he's been working on for years, and that's good. I know IRC has a number of certification inspections, and we've obviously got some things in the ASTM 541 area that we basically, our committee basically got that restructured and started again. And we know that a number of local jurisdictions have adopted the E541 standard for that quality for inspections and so forth. And then the last 2 areas were obviously key ones that we felt were important for the growth of affordable housing. And that's in the tiny home community space, where we're actually getting more than one tiny house put on a piece of private property, and that could potentially become a kind of a communities of interest. We know that there's a number of stumbling areas in that on the zoning side, but again, if we can get the standards put together, like maybe potentially adopting NFPA 1194, which is a standard for RV parks and campgrounds, we may be able to adopt and create our own standard for tiny home communities that maybe we get 80% of that standard identified and modified so that we can create these tiny home communities. And then finally, how do we address the challenges for utilities provisioning? And that's in the microgrid space. We know that Colorado's kind of leading the way with a couple of microgrid bills, that are looking at resiliency and planning long term, but there's also potential for demonstrations of microgrids that might be able to lend themselves to the development for affordable housing. So that's kind of it in the nutshell. I don't want to spend too much time on it now. Obviously, we'll dive into it later. Appreciate the opportunity to put that out there for the group, though. Thank you.
You bet. And hopefully everybody's following along the chat. There's some really good information there. Tracy, I think we're going to go back and let you finish up your pro and con piece.
Okay, perfect. And then Sam, we'll add on the ITHP that Thea is discussing on underneath ASTM, and then we'll also add on the NOAA Plus, because I feel like those are the two that I was missing on this page, or on that piece. So I'll go ahead and add those on after this.
Thank you.
As far as pros and cons go of each of these, you guys, again, this is not all inclusive. It really was hoping to get a lot of the team input. I am taking notes, and I'm looking to build onto this for the team. So let's talk about NFPA 1192, right? As a tiny house builder, we actually had a third-party certification that recognized our work and our builds. It allowed for people to have places to park because they were able to go into RV parks. It allowed people to qualify for an RV loan, which was allowing people to have payments in that, $500 and $700 range for a tiny house, which was affordable for people to actually own something. So all of those were very good pros. Most that built to the NFPA were exceeding requirements by combining methodology to exceed NFPA by using standard IRC, such as the Simpson strong ties as an example, from tying in your bottom plate to your walls in framing. That may not be in NFPA, but it's definitely an IRC. So even though builders were building to NFPA, they were exceeding it, but not being recognized for it. Because they knew it was the right thing to do. These things are traveling down the road. When you take a tiny house out on the highway, you are taking them through hurricane winds, and you need to be earthquake winds, and you need to be able to withstand that. So wind loads were very important to us, and why builders did it that way. It was a cost effective for a lot of the good builders out there, because we had already invested several $1,000s into the third-party certification programs, from our manuals to the methodology to paying for our inspections of our facilities and paying for all of our units to be inspected and certified. So there was already that investment made, and people have been doing it. The electrical and the plumbing required, less from a, permitting. We didn't have to have permits. So that is one of the things that was considered a pro. The cons, obviously, RVIA didn't want tiny houses labeled as RVs or for full-time use. We also all know that most jurisdictions consider RVs for temporary usage. So therefore, zoning doesn't allow for full-time RV use. So we already all know that. However, we all also already know that people are living in them. So at this point, at least we had the certification, and it was something that people recognized. However, the con was we weren't recognized for the true build methodology of that standard 2x4 framing. People, referred to it as an RV, which, may have 2 inches of insulation, or less, 2-inch walls, less insulation, whereas a house, tiny house, is built with 5-inch walls, and with ridge beams and trusses and, R19 and R34 in the floor. So we weren't being recognized as far as a con goes of the true methodology in the builds. As far as ANSI goes, it's pretty much the same thing as NFPA, you guys. It allowed the builders to build on chassis. It allowed people to build wider. We had the same certification companies that were able to certify our units to ANSI as we were getting them certified to NFPA. This allowed for hardwire electrical and plumbing, so local jurisdictions seemed a little bit more receptive. It was, there was a difference. California made a really good example of that, allowing to, bring in tiny homes in more jurisdictions. And that third-party certification program still allowed that small business, to build unique, and custom homes. So obviously cost effectiveness is a big one. They did have places to park them, in RV parks and park models. But again, we all know in the state of Colorado, park models are even not legal to live in for full-time use, but we still do it. So at the same time, there was, pros and cons. Time, ANSI and NFPA seem to be a faster methodology. When it comes to IRC, this is where you guys will have to really help me out with finding the pros. From a quality perspective, we absolutely respect it and think of it as, the pros, because our framing will be recognized correctly. the quality of work, the electrical, our plumbing, all of that will be recognized correctly, the way we build it right now, just like a regular home. However, we do know the costs are going to go up, right? There's going to be costs for permits that we normally don't pull now. And we, unfortunately, from a customer perspective, when you build on foundation, because there's a lot of customers and a lot of people out there that want a tiny house and they want to build it on foundation, but what they're running into is that the costs become unachievable for them. By the time they buy their land, by the time they pull their permits, by the time they get their electrical, plumbing, septic, setbacks and everything ran, it's just starting to become too costly to even own a tiny house at that point for these particular customers. Right now here in Colorado Springs, we have a customer in a rural area being quoted $30,000 just to add water for her tiny house. And she already owns the land. So when those costs start to accumulate, they make people feel like even owning a tiny house is now becoming unachievable. I will say this, when you're able to connect septic to a regular house off the main house, we've seen RV hookups only cost customers about $5,000. So, running, $30,000 versus $5,000 is two different things for customers. And it becomes more achievable when you can tap into that main house. So we see some pros to the IRC, obviously, for being recognized for how we truly build. But then I feel like the tiny house industry does see some cons with it. And a lot of it has to do with costs, process interrupters like multiple inspections, and possible permitting and things of that nature. So, but you guys, you're doing this every day. And so maybe you guys can coach us on maybe how it's not really a con. Maybe there's not process or timeline inhibitors, and maybe we're just not educated in those steps. The last thing is really just ASTM. And, as everybody else already mentioned, ITHP and NOAA. I think both Brad and Robin did a good job of explaining the pros and the cons, or at least the pros on both of those. When it comes to ASTM, I saw that as a focus for tiny houses on wheels. We're not hiding the wheels, and it's not a push towards modular, which a lot of us feel is going to be less costly approach. So there is some interest in, that ASTM focus as well. So that's pretty much all I had. Again, I don't expect this to be an all-inclusive list, but at least to get us going on some pros and cons and conversation of each.
Tracy, thank you so much for taking the lead on that. Tim, I see you've got your hand up. You've got some thoughts?
Yeah, hi, Tim Pate. Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, Tracy. That was a well done summary. Appreciate that. When you have in your list these additional costs, concerns, and you list septic, water, electric, when you do a tiny house on a piece of property that doesn't, where are you getting water and what are you doing with your sewer? And then how are you getting your electric then, where those costs would be different than if I was going to stick build one? I'm not quite sure how that works.
So I think the costs are still there, right? Whether you stick build a house, you've got to pull, electric and water and everything correctly and tie it into the utilities correctly. However, when you build a tiny house, it's that's where the new rules of being allowed to put it on land, it's still going to require septic and everything. So it's still the same cost as if you were building an on foundation build. You're still pulling the permits, you're still running a septic, you're still running electric. So it's not going to change the cost, whether you build a foundation or whether you build a tiny house. Why do people go towards tiny houses? Where's the cost effectiveness? That's why they're in RV parks, right?
Or
Because it makes it more affordable, or they already have land, or they already have power ran, right? Or they already have that well, right? Go ahead, Austin.
So yeah, most of the people that are getting tiny homes, and just in our realm, not every single one of them is going out to buy a patch of land to install a septic, a sewer, to install power and a well. I mean, that's just not your everyday, all day customer. However, they are there, they're out there and they do exist. And we have conversations with them on a regular basis. That's usually one question that they ask a lot if they are looking for a patch of land. But there's times that you'll come across more than often, somebody has land with a well. Somebody has land that already has a septic system installed, and usually or it's power. It's usually two of the three that they have, and it's the additional cost usually comes down to septic. And I don't think that's where customers are afraid or run away. Actually, if you educate them properly, people want to do things correctly anyways. So the reality is for the most part, they already have a way to hook up to a 50 amp, receptacle. And they already have a well where they can hook up to receive water. It's usually one of the three things that they're going to need in this type of circumstance.
Yeah, I just think we see a few different, things that kind of pop up and the differentiators. You have different clientele. I know in the tiny house world, a lot of people think that customers or people automatically are going off grid. And that's not really the case. I would say that every single unit we've built has been to connect all electric, and they're designed to connect to the proper utilities, right? So they are connecting to electrical and plumbing and septic. But again, it's only 50 amp service. It's not too expensive to have an electrician come out and run a 50 amp electric pole.
I guess the reason I brought that question up, thank you for the explanation, and it kind of made my point why I was asking the question, because in your summary, it appeared that you were comparing the cost to do, say, a stick build permanent foundation versus a tiny home on a chassis, and talking about the potential additional costs that are going to be for the water and sewer and electric for the tiny home. So that's why I didn't understand. And I think making my point is to do a proper comparison for a typical build, whether it's a tiny home or a permanent structure under the IRC, you would exclude those utility costs, so to speak, and just really point out the differences between the build, whether it's on a chassis or on a foundation. That's my point, and that was why I brought that up.
So Tim, do you mean more so like the permit that you have to pull to build on foundation versus us not having to pull a permit when I build on a chassis? Would that be one of those costs?
I think that where this group is going, and based on the state legislation, that in Colorado, when it ends up eventually under the DOLA, the Division of Housing, they will be doing their permit requirements. And so I guess your group's position that you don't think you need the permits. I know in my community, not only, and I think a lot of jurisdictions not only have the permit costs, but we do the use tax, which is similar to the sales tax for buying materials. And we're like 4.56% or something like that. So, I would assume that you're buying your materials for the tiny home somewhere and paying some kind of a use or a sales tax.
Correct.
We collect use tax. We don't collect the sales tax too. We don't double tax. So excluding permit costs, I guess it's going to depend on where the jurisdiction, if you're doing that, or, maybe Sam or Mo can talk about how they do their the permit costs through, which will eventually be through the Division of Housing.
And for everybody's, we've got a couple other hands up. Mo is back with us. Can you guys hear me? It says my internet connection is unstable. Okay, so Mo's back with us. We're not trying to create standards for the RV industry or the park model industry. We're really trying to look at and Tim did a nice job of referencing the legislation, and I don't have the definition in front of me, but the tiny home on a foundation is still going to have to pull those permits from the local jurisdiction. And yes, they may be movable, and we'll have that discussion on how we attach to a foundation and what a foundation is defined as. But we are looking at the construction methods for that piece of the industry, not the entire tiny home industry, tiny homes on wheels, snowbirds that move it here and there. And there will still be, I think, a need for, and need is probably not the right word, there will still be a demand for pull your tiny home into a park and plug it into RV park types atmosphere. We're not going to be able to stop that, and there's still going to be a demand. I think we're looking at something a little different. Sean, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So on permits are going to be required by the local jurisdiction. In our case, I'm specifically talking about like HUD code as an example. They don't have to be expensive. In our county here, a building permit's $100 for a HUD code home, whether you put it on a permanent foundation or you put it on a temporary foundation. I mean, those requirements and guidelines and what are going to be acceptable are going to be a county by county, city by city thing because of home rule. I think overall, I'm just trying to wrap my head around why a tiny home, whatever we come up with the definition is, can't be set on either a permanent foundation or a temporary foundation the same way a HUD code home can be done. And then that would preserve your ability to put it into an RV park and set it up, crown the site, have, again, the guidelines would have to be developed for each of these systems, whether it's by the manufacturer or the engineer. But unless I'm missing it, I'm not saying do the HUD code. What I am saying is liken it to the HUD code to where you have options, and then the local jurisdiction is going to allow those or not allow those. Or am I just kind of missing it a little bit?
I don't think you're missing it at all. I think we're trying to define the scope of what the Department of Housing is going to be responsible for. We want to make sure that we have construction standards that protect the public to a point where we can, whether they're built out of state or in state, that we have a system in place that allows us to look at that encapsulated construction process before they are hooked up to the truck and drove out here, right? Or drove to wherever their final destination is. That's part of the piece that we, just like we do with the modular side. Mo, am I getting that about right?
I'm gonna save my opinions for the end here.
Okay.
I think you should just hear from everybody then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Mike, you've had your hand up for a little bit, but then I need to jump to the TAC members, Nate and Janine.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. Just addressing Tim's question about, this whole issue about the utilities provisioning. And I made a quick comment, Tracy's points are well taken in terms of the urban installations of tiny houses, because obviously you've got the utilities pretty much there. I mean, the whole dichotomy is urban property tends to be expensive or relatively expensive, and your utilities provisioning is pretty much there. You can basically hook up to it with basic taps that the utilities could provide you for a given home, or if you've got more than one, like I know they did a tap discount for the Mill Street Fusion installation that Tracy worked on with that installation downtown for the youth, and they got some good breaks on utility. But when you move into the suburban and rural context, things start to change a little bit. Your real estate prices tend to go down a little bit versus urban, but your utilities cost provisioning goes through the roof. And this is what the real crux of the matter about how to local zoning, whether it's county or city, depending upon that suburban or rural context, you've got costs involved in the provisioning of health and safety requirements for water and waste and electricity, et cetera. And one of the things that we're trying to explore with this new ASTM standard is Obviously, we're going to have a self-contained tiny house that's got to be able to meet all the health and safety codes and how utilities are interconnected in and out of that single unit. But one of the things that we want to be able to put on the table, obviously, is the ability of, well, how do I interconnect multiple tiny houses into a potential local microgrid that can provide those utility hookups in a very cost-effective fashion. And I'll give you an example, real quickly. Obviously, HVAC provisioning. If I can build tiny houses in a cluster of 10 or 20 and not have to provision all of those units with, expensive HVAC units, and I can use possibly a multi-split ductless heating system and split the usage of the compressors over the blower units and provision them over the microgrid, I've got a low cost way of doing that. But how do I get electricity? Well, yeah, you can go for solar, but solars need batteries and batteries need to be trickle charged. So we're looking at alternative fuel and electricity powering sources like fuel cells that could potentially be on that local grid, provide that electricity and some heat, that we can do some things with water pasteurization and distillation if we've got some tanking potential. And the other thing is septic tank and leach fields should not be the only game in town for human waste management. We're not a big fan of composting toilets. I did see a chat message on there asking about whether or not Colorado allowed that. We think that there's some other technologies that can be bring to the table to help manage human waste and potentially turn it into an alternative fuel. So this is kind of, the longer range approaches that we see happening in the suburban and rural areas to provide property owners with some, alternatives that may be able to lower the cost. Now, we need to prove these out. They need to be tested in the market, and then they obviously have to be adopted by the local jurisdictions. And they're going to want to, it's like, show me, prove it to me, let's see how this works. So we see the ability, maybe laying down some of these voluntary consensus standards with the levels of technologies that may, cross over NFPA or IEEE, in terms of the microgrids, and slowly but surely we can start testing and proving these concepts out. So I would not, throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, on saying that, building a tiny house in a rural context is always going to be expensive. We're working to try to bring those costs down. So hopefully that's a kind of a balanced approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. That's good info.
Yeah.
I see Janine and Nate with their hands up. Janine, I'm going to go with you next.
Okay, sorry about that. I keep having to adjust my screen. I apologize. I guess what Tim was trying to address and what I'm pushing to try to address here is that not building in an urban setting or building in an urban setting, you're still going to have foundation requirements. It doesn't mean it may have to be concrete foundations. They could be helical piers. There's other options for them that would keep the cost down. Septic systems, yes, we always have to do something with our waste. These are not RVs anymore. These are now stick-built structures on a trailer. So we want to make sure that we're not dissing putting these in a place that isn't an RV park or a park model situation. We want to make sure that we have the septic, we have the water, that we have the power to these places. In our county, in Park County, we have a ton of off-grid properties because there just isn't any service out there. We have cisterns for water because there's no water under a lot of these lots that are out here. But we still have to provide the minimum health and life safety requirements. And I guess the way that one paragraph was written, Tracy, it sounded like you were really saying, no, you shouldn't have to have requirements if you're putting these out on the lot. But we do, to make sure that, one, like out here, it's not going to blow over with 110-mile-an-hour winds. And it's not going to collapse under the snow loads. So it was a really well done report, but I understand where Tim and I are talking about, you still have to have foundations for these things. So that's just my 2 cents. There's plenty of options out there with technology and with the industry to be able to accomplish this, versus saying that it's a deterrent to the tiny home owner to try to place a unit on some of these properties.
Thank you, Janine. Let me go to Nate, Tracy, and then I'll catch you.
So I kind of wanted to point out a few things, but then maybe also ask some questions to Sam and Mo. You know, I'm not a tiny home person, so this is very educational to me to understand, kind of what your hurdles are and things like that, in the industry. The thing that I kind of wanted to get clarified was, there are a lot of opportunities in tiny housing for affordable housing. There are a lot of opportunities from an industry standpoint. There's a lot of hurdles for the industry as well, whether it be, zoning or reduced tap fees for, limited use because it's such a tiny structure, all those things. But we're not addressing all of them here. And we're addressing a very specific hurdle that the tiny home industry has in Colorado, and not that there are not other hurdles. There's a ton of other hurdles. And so I kind of wanted to get that clarified, and so my understanding of what we're attempting to do is today, I'm assuming this would be a great question for Tim or Janine. If somebody walks into your jurisdiction and says, I want to put a tiny home on a lot in your town, and I want to be able to do that. You don't necessarily have a path for that today. From a utilities and all, yeah, you're going to require all the same utilities that a house has. And I see why at this point in time. But I feel like that's what we're really trying to figure out is how can we expand the tiny home market into some traditional placing, lots, things like that, in Colorado by clarifying some statewide codes that allow that to happen for guys like Tim and Janine that are trying to figure out how to make it work for people that want to put one on a lot. Just anybody get kind of, is that really what we're trying to do here, and kind of wanting to, as we move forward, focus our conversation on that, not that all of the other items are not important, not that there's not a lot of hurdles that need to get cleaned up. It's just that's not what we're doing here.
So Nate, I think you're on the right track, but I promised to go to Tracy next. Tracy.
Yeah, so let me just back up a little bit. I don't think I did a very good job when I did this today. So here's the thing. I don't think the tiny house industry is opposing the requirements or the need for things like foundations or tie downs, piers. We've seen them set up with blocks, blocking, skirting, decking. I don't really think, that we all have an issue with that. We respect that. We don't even have an issue with IRC methodology because it respects us from a framing, insulation, snow load, wind, electrical, plumbing. So it hits all of those areas, and we respect all of that as well. When I brought up costs associated, that's really what's bothering some of the tiny house industry is, well, where are the processes going to change for us? We don't really have a problem with doing plan approvals. I think we're more concerned with, we already have a third-party inspection company that does plan approvals. Now that I'm going to have to send them off to the state, what is the cost associated with that? And what is the timeline associated? And how does it line up with my production methodology, right? And so that's from a business perspective, we have to figure out how to work with the state on that stuff. So we don't really have a problem with the permits. Right now, if you look at the tiny houses that are placed in Colorado that are being placed, what we want to pretend or say are legally, they are pulling electrical and plumbing permits and they are tying them in correctly. I agree. I certainly don't want, septic going anywhere but where it needs to go, right? We're 100% on board with everybody on that. And I think we're all marching in the same direction towards that. I guess my point was, these were the pros and the cons for the industry. We've never had it defined. So we had to go and figure out how to make a way for ourselves and for our customers and do the best that we could, while trying to follow laws and rules that didn't really allow us, right? We weren't accepted, to go down to the building department and say, hey, I'm going to build this. Nobody would look at my plans because there was no process for it. Now this is our opportunity to have a process for this statewide. So I don't want to say that we're not on board with everything that you guys are saying, because we are. I think from a con perspective, our industry is concerned with the increase in costs. So that way we're making sure that we're accounting for them properly as well. So that's a little bit more of what I meant. So hopefully I can kind of straighten that out a little bit.
Thank you, Tracy. And you actually did a very good job in presenting the concerns of the industry. And that's what we wanted out of that. Mo, I know you have your hand up, but I promised to go to Tim next, and then I'll come back to you. Tim?
I'm sorry, me first, or I thought Mo?
I'm going to let you go first.
All right, well, I'm going to just respond a little bit, well, to two things. One, Nate's comment about, from a jurisdictional standpoint. So if someone came into Broomfield and was looking to build a tiny home, and, of course, we know that the main body of the IRC, it'd be very difficult to get that to happen based on some of the minimum requirements, and the size, et cetera, et cetera. But I have always been open for someone to come in and request to do any kind of project, whether it's through the International Building Code or the International Residential Code, as an alternate method and design. And so if someone came in and said, we'd like to create or get a permit for this tiny home and use the appendix, would you consider that? And I said, absolutely, I would look at that. I'd take a look at the whole concept. It's going to be turned in by, typically an architect of record with whoever the tiny home builder would be. Of course, we'd have zoning issues in my community, but if there were other communities and there were places where it would be acceptable, for the minimum size structure. So I'm always open to that. I do that with big commercial projects occasionally. And so it would not be never, I don't even want to look at you or talk to you. So at least that's just the way I've operated.
Tim, let me clarify the question is with that is that's great. First of all, awesome. But from the standpoint of what we're doing here will make that path a little bit easier and not as
Nate, wait your turn, man. You got to raise your hand.
That's cool.
Let him finish, and then I'm going to jump in, and then we'll go to you.
It's a little dialogue. That's okay.
That's fair.
Good.
We're all,
good
some of us are
dialogue.
waiting to talk. So please.
He was saying
finish.
something good. He was saying something good about me. I'll take it. But I also was interesting, just a short aside. I was at the code change hearings, I forget what, a couple of cycles ago, when the tiny home lobby group, I don't remember who it was, but it was multiple tiny home builders and designers were successful in getting the appendix into the final action hearings for, I guess that was what, the 18 code? I forget, the 15 code maybe. And I've been going to code change hearings since the year 2000. And that is the only time I've ever seen the membership, probably 400 people, stand up and applaud that group to get that successfully in, which was very impressive to make that step. So that's just my comment.
Mo?
All right. I'm going to start talking. I'm going to start driving after this, Sam. Thank you so much for covering this morning. Apologies to everyone for being late. As you can all imagine, things have gotten crazy here since ballot initiative Proposition 123 passed, thanks to the voters of Colorado. So we had a quick meeting about that to start planning and strategizing. With that being said, Nate, thank you so much for what you shared earlier, because you saved me some words. You hit the nail on the head. Tim and Janine, this will not impact your process with regard to site-built work, right? What you're doing sounds great from our perspective, right? For the tiny home community and for the building officials and anybody else interested that's on this call, this is about a structure built off-site, sold to a consumer to then be utilized somewhere else, right? That's what this program is here for. And we already have a modular program that addresses this from a different lens. We have a HUD manufactured home program that addresses this from a different lens, right? We have park models that are outside of the government regulation because they're not deemed to be dwellings. This is to capture that missing middle that we talked about at the last meeting, right? So let's not confuse it with what locals will be doing for site-built projects, what consumers may want for a park model, what consumers may want for a HUD manufactured home, what consumers may want in the form of an IRC Appendix Q 2018 tiny house placed on a permanent foundation, which we already have through our program, our modular program. This is something different. And for that, we need to figure out how to address construction standards, to implement construction standards for that, as well as installation standards for it. Okay, the legislator, has already weighed in and provided direction for us. This is not an opportunity to address all hurdles, as Nate so astutely pointed out. There may be a slew of hurdles that the tiny home industry and those consumers interested in that product have to face with not only manufacturing, but purchasing and installing and utilizing such a home, right? Zoning being one of them. We're not here to solve that problem. The legislator has not weighed in on that, right? That is still left very much up to the locals. Any tap fees, any other requirements related to the site, etc. That is all still very much with the locals. Yes, Tracy and others, there will be some costs associated with going through our program, just like there's a cost for a manufacturer of modular homes to go through our program, or a manufacturer of HUD code homes to go through the federal program. Well, there's also a massive opportunity, and I heard Tracy touch upon this as well. That opportunity is widespread acceptance in the state of Colorado. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to force locals to change their zoning, but for those that are interested in accommodating a state certified product, which will alleviate some consternation and concerns on the local side of things, hopefully, there's a pathway here, right? And we're all wrestling with affordable housing crisis in every jurisdiction. And so this provides something as an option for consumers and local jurisdictions alike, right? That comes through a state regulated program that should address safety concerns, okay? And today, what was on the agenda was to start with the construction side of things. We seem to have fragmented in all sorts of areas, which is fine. We have to refocus. At the end of the day, we have to come up with construction standards and installation standards for this product by July 1st of 2023. And as we talked about earlier, that actually means the end of March, since they have to be noticed as proposed rules for public comment before they're actually adopted by the State Housing Board. So I hope that is clear to everybody. Feel free to raise questions and concerns about other areas, but ultimately we have to really focus on what the legislators have set forth for us. And if you have any questions or concerns about that, you might want to revisit House Bill 22-1242, which clearly spells it out. Now, of course, there is some room for clarification on some of that direction provided in the bill. And that's what we can do through our rulemaking process. One of them being, it's silent on what the standards look like, right? But we're gonna need it. Permanent foundation, temporary foundation. Eric did a great job of providing that framework, but we might want to clarify that a bit further through rules. So stuff like that. What we can introduce is things that would require legislative change, right? That's not what this process is about. So there are others on this call who are interested in furthering the cause further, if you will, and running legislation to refine how tiny homes should be regulated in the state of Colorado. then there's a legislative process to do so, and that's going to be starting in January. But this is not the process for that. So hopefully that's clear to everybody. And I'll lower my hand. Anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns? Nate, sorry I interrupted you earlier. Yes, Nate, you got your hand up. See? That works. You're absurd.
To clarify, Tim, what you were saying is that you're willing to work with people to figure it out, which is awesome. The purpose of what we're doing will make that an easier path for you. Is that accurate? So you won't have to have a ready and willing building official saying, I'm willing to kind of work within the rules and modify and try to help you figure this out. When that person walks into any building official, they'll have the pathway that the building official will have to follow. Is that fair? Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. I did have a question though, in the chats, and thank you for, I think it was Dan or somebody that reminded us of the exceptions, excuse me, and Brad, I think it was Brad too, is a combined effort. The exceptions in the HUD regulations to allow for voluntary compliance in its program for anything smaller than, one part says 400 and another part says 320 square feet. That's voluntary compliance. So I'm curious as to why the tiny home industry does not feel that voluntary compliance with the federal standards, since it allows for it, is sufficient enough. Anybody from the tiny home industry want to field that question? In other words, why is that not good enough and we now have to reinvent the wheel? Robin. Your hand is
Hi,
up.
guys. Sorry, let me lower my hand here. Yeah, I can try to address that, and I'm not an expert on HUD code, but I certainly can address it. There are certain restrictions or certain realities of a tiny house on wheels, especially if we're talking about a tiny house on wheels that is 8'6" wide by 13'6" tall that can go over the highways. Where in the HUD standard, I don't see anything in there for a 2" by 5" or 2" by 6" tube steel mainframe for the chassis and the floor system. Also, from what I understand, and this is just coming from Dave Tompos, that there are only a couple of third-party inspectors that do HUD. So obviously, I don't know what the requirements are for those third-party inspectors to do, but the cost of inspecting and certifying to the HUD standard, I would like to see some details on that, exactly how are they inspected, if somebody can address that, and what are the costs. Basically, I'm in my back of my mind, I'm thinking about the directives to consider, the less than 20 guy that builds less than 20 in a year, or the custom home builder, or the owner builder. And I know you can do a one in the backyard kind of a modular home in Colorado. I don't know whether you can do that in HUD or not, but that would be one of my concerns. And exactly what are the standards for HUD? I mean, we're talking some energy standards in IRC that when we're fighting loft heights, if we have to get a high R value in the ceiling, we usually have a 2x6 rafter up there, and to get the higher R values, it's going to be difficult even with closed cell spray foam. So, just talking off the cuff, I wasn't prepared for that question, but because I didn't know that honestly that you could voluntarily build to the HUD code, and then I guess if the HUD code was built to, then and it's 200 square feet, would the Colorado building officials say okay to that. So those are just some off the cuff kind of comments, but I hope that it helps spur some other comments.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you not being prepared for that particular question. And for that reason, having the courage to step up first. So what I'm basically hearing is the HUD standards don't cover everything that the tiny home community would like to see covered in their particular product that they're building. And of course, not every tiny home manufacturer is the same. So keeping that in context as well, but also the cost, it sounds like. And so this seems to be the overarching driver in all of this, is finding a more cost-effective method to build something for folks. But to address something that you said, Robin, I can't speak for local jurisdictions or DORA for that matter, and John McGee's on this call, mercifully. And of course, James McLean also used to work for DORA. But I don't know if regulatory organizations would have an issue with the size of the home that's built off site, as long as it has been plan reviewed, inspected, and certified by a regulatory authority that they have confidence in. But maybe I'm speaking out of turn here. So I would love to hear from John, James, Tim, Janine, and others on the call if they see things a bit differently. John, I see your hand up.
Hi, Mo. Yeah, the Colorado Plumbing Code doesn't have any, what I want to say, parameters to cover these, because we need to allow utilities per se, to be set down. We want to see that they've been inspected, plumbing and stuff. And the only way we do that right now for residentially is your silver sticker. So at this point in time, that's what our plumbing code calls for, says we have to look for that before we can really inspect the plumbing. So when they bring in a tiny home from off-site and set it, we have the quandary is there's no inspections that we can relate to it. Officially, they might have a third party, but that's not covered in our code right now. And so we run into that issue. And I think the same issue is on the electrical side, same thing. They can kind of get by with the plug and play, and James McLean can kind of relate to that a little bit. But that's our issue, is the Colorado plumbing and electrical codes have no way to verify that those actual inspections are approved for off-site built. Now, if it's built on site, we'll look at them as we go, just like we would a regular house. So that's not an issue. The on-site built ones, not an issue, but in 39 counties that the plumbing board covers, it's an issue because we don't have any way to verify that the plumbing has been inspected. Does that make sense?
It does, John. Thank you for that. And we'll segue, as a perfect segue, since you mentioned electrical, to go to James. And I think I saw Janine's hand up too, so I'll go to her after James. Thank you, John.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with John McGee. One thing about electrical, in the electrical statutes, there's an exception for inspections, and that's if it's considered an appliance. So that means if it has a cord and you plug it in, it's exempt from inspections. So the workaround that I've seen with that was there's a pedestal, a RV pedestal that's inspected that meets code requirements, and whoever owns their tiny home is just plug and play. So they have a cord, twist lock, they plug it in. So that's how they were getting around. But unfortunately, without it being, if it's on site inspected, that's one thing. But if it's hooked up to utilities without a cord, there was no regulation on how it's inspected. So it seems like a consistent problem throughout the state.
Thank you, James. Janine.
And I agree with their opinions as well. Our biggest concerns about tiny homes coming into our jurisdictions are that we don't know how they were built. So if they were inspected in a factory, such as the modulars and the HUDs are, that's one thing. But to have them come in and not know what's behind those walls or in those walls is one of our biggest concerns with tiny homes. Now, under the state regulatory process, just like with the modular homes, that would help us immensely. It doesn't quite address John's concerns though. And that's something we're just gonna have to work through as this TAC committee. My 2 cents.
Well said, Janine. Robin, you're back.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the concerns that you're bringing up right now, especially Janine and James and John, that what if, I'm just throwing this out there as a possibility, what if the inspection process included inspections being done by ICC certified, licensed in the electrical, the plumbing, structural, et cetera. And what if the inspection was recorded and digitized, and you could have access to that, and you could see the rough and electrical, the rough plumbing, the structural, everything. What if that was made available to the local jurisdiction? Would that help you? Would you feel a little bit better about allowing that unit in if you know that that unit was inspected and you had the availability of seeing that inspection real time through a video and photos and inspector notes?
Wow, Robin, I was gonna say inspection part is a discussion we might want to have on another day, since we want to start with construction standards. But man, you lit up the board here. I saw all sorts of hands go up, so I think I'm going to keep going with it. I don't know who to start with. I think I'll just go start with Tim, since I just heard from Janine and James, and I'll work back to you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Robin. So we routinely, my staff routinely allow third-party inspections. In fact, in the International Building Code, there are quite a few that are required to be done by third party: welding, masonry, steel, bolting, etc. And I have in my municipal code, I require all foundations on residential to be inspected by an engineering firm. With that being said, we vet the company and their staff who are going to be doing those before they go do them. So, I mean, I respect that, that if somebody, the tiny home builder was going to be using one, but if we don't know who they are or what their background is, I as a building official, because I'm going to be the one doing the certificate of occupancy, my name goes on a lot of those, about 800 a year or more. I'd like to be pretty confident that who is doing the inspections outside of, like, my staff, or in this case, it would be, some going through the Division of Housing. So that's my feeling, my response on that.
Thank you, Tim. James, you're up next.
Thank you, Mo. Unfortunately, by Colorado statutes, any electrical installation for sale has to be installed by a licensed electrical contractor with the correct ratio journeyman to apprentice ratio. So if a homeowner does installation, it can't be for sale or for lease. So a manufacturer would have to keep those requirements, state requirements for electrical installation. I'm sure John's are probably similar.
Thank you, James. Janine.
And I think also state statutes, also, you'll have to correct me on this, James, if I'm wrong, but doesn't it require, they don't recognize IRC electrical inspectors anymore? Don't you have to be a minimum of a journeyman to perform electrical inspections, whether it's a county or jurisdiction or state?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that starts January 1st.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, the jurisdictions wouldn't be able to look at that. So that's another hurdle that would have to go through the construction process as well. So yes, we do allow third-party inspections, but it wouldn't be for plumbing, electrical. It would be for those things that are outlined under special inspections in the IBC. And if we had an extenuating circumstance, like we were understaffed and couldn't flat get there, kind of like your third-party review right now for MHIP, those would be the extenuating circumstances. But a lot of things we wouldn't be able to look at. And so that's why it's a concern for us in the construction process that it is monitored and observed.
No, thank you, Janine. I still think we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I definitely want to call on a few other people to respond to what Robin shared. Robin, I think that's something we can definitely consider when we get to the inspection side of things, because now it's going to be going through the state program, right? So the locals don't have to worry about it. It's going to go through us. So there's some opportunity there. We're just not there yet. So save some, and I know you're very vested in remote inspections, but if you can hang tight to those ideas for a better time when we get to that part of it, that'd be great. I'm going to call on Nate next, and I think I saw John Myers' hand up as well.
One item, and John, I'm going to defer to John real quick on this, is I don't believe that modular factories today have certified electricians doing their electrical installation as well as plumbing licensing. Now, they might have a master within their factory, but I know all the workers are not 100% for sure. But I'll let John maybe add a little bit to that. I don't know if that's allowed or not, or if that's different. I don't know where the regulations come in there, but I just know that that's how most factories operate.
Yeah, and to bring up Mo's point, when we have defined construction standards, the local counties don't have to worry about what's behind the walls, because the inspections will be done through Donnie and Sam reviewing plans. So the current worry about what's behind the walls goes away once we define what construction standards apply. Then it's universal, right? So whether it be HUD, for example, or modular, we have an inspection process that occurs through the state of Nebraska. So Colorado accepts Nebraska's inspection process and our submittals of our QC manuals, construction standard manuals, et cetera. So I'd imagine the same applies once we define construction standards for tiny homes. In terms of in-plant construction, correct. You have those that are certified to draw shops and inspect those shops, but the guy that's gluing the pipes isn't necessarily a certified plumber. It's not a requirement.
Thanks, John. We'll obviously delve into that further, like I said, once we get to that part of it. But I'm going to call on a few more people. Looks like Dan Fitzpatrick has had his hand up for a while and I missed it. Apologies. If anyone else got missed, feel free to call me out in the chat feature. Let me find you, Dan, and I will unlock you. Why can't I not? Oh, that's why. I'm looking at the panelists. Dan, I don't see your hand up in my part. There you go. But I don't see an ability to unmute you either. So maybe the unmute feature is on your side.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Hey, thank you. I had my hand up relative to the discussion we were having earlier about HUD voluntary compliance. Just
oh, great. Good.
Just to bring you up to what a number of our builders are doing around the country. Here in California, we have several tiny home builders that have been building to NFPA or ANSI standards for years, but they are now also building, in many cases, exactly the same unit, but getting them certified also as HUD units. So that here in California, HUD units, manufactured housing units, are accepted in many places that other states don't. So it's very much, certainly as accessory dwelling units. So it's certainly worth their time to have their units so designated. Again, most of these units are over 300 square feet to meet various HUD requirements. We also have builders that have, again, exactly the same unit, that they can get it certified as ANSI and get it certified as HUD, or they can get it certified as IRC. It's the same unit, but they have all of their plan approvals, stamped plans, everything approved to meet all of the requirements. A lot of the confusion revolves around units built with lofts, units without lofts, everything built on one floor. Has nothing to do with Q, AQ, or whatever. It meets, from the chassis up, it can meet the International Residential Code, issues and requirements. Same is true voluntarily getting it approved by HUD, and the Department of Housing and Community Development is signing off on them on an ongoing basis with a number of our builders here in California. So I just wanted to bring those points up, and for whatever's worth. Thanks.
No freeze.
He's back. Mo, are you back?
I am. I'm going to rip out this Ethernet wire and hang myself outside this window if this continues to happen. This is the second time it's happened to me again today. Apologies to everyone. I don't know why my computer continues to struggle with the security in our government building, since it is a government issued computer, but there you have it. Anyway, did Austin speak? I got cut off as soon as I was calling on Austin. Did anyone hear me call on Austin? Oh, Austin, I saw your hand up. You may not have heard me. Can you speak?
All right, I'm hearing you now.
All right. You got a bit of feedback. There you go.
All right. So from what I'm gathering here, as a builder, I really think I enjoy listening to Janine, James, John, and Tim. I've been in the industry. I represent my company's Tiny Building Experts. So I've been building tiny homes for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. I've done about 400, 450, I don't know, somewhere in there that's how many homes I've had an opportunity of touching. I've also had an opportunity to travel around and see different tiny homes get built. And from what I gathered in our meeting last time was trying to understand what is the standard going to be in construction for tiny homes. What I have seen is what I hope it doesn't turn into. And there's definitely a wrong way to do things. What I gathered with Janine, James, John, and Tim is this is a big deal. When you build something like this for somebody to get inside, live, whatever the case might be, if the builder doesn't take it serious, that's someone's life on the line. That might seem extreme, but I wish all builders thought that way and not to take it away from the ones who do. There is a right way to build these homes that would address those concerns of, again, Janine, James, John, and Tim, and others on the call as well, that are tasked with ensuring things are done correctly. So what I'm getting at is what is the standard operating procedure going to be for building tiny homes? I think that's kind of what I'm hoping to get out of this call, and that's why I'm on, that's why I'm listening, and I'm enjoying it. To kind of clear some things up, there is third-party inspections that do happen with tiny home builders, and Does that, at the end of the day, does that roll up to inspections from the state, from different counties, different, that's a conversation, right? There is money already set aside in that realm. So to say that, we're worried about cost and stuff, yes. But I think that what I'm hearing is how do we ensure these homes are being built correctly? How do we ensure what's behind the walls? How do we know that somebody's using the right gauge wire? How do we know that somebody's getting a 1/4 inch of slope, to drain, certain dirty arms and whatnot? There is a standard operating procedure. And in my experience in the past, we've wrote books on it. And it even came all the way down to each area, plumbing, electrical, framing, exterior, what have you. In the tiny home world, even your siding has to meet certain requirements, wind, because it's going down the road and it can't blow off. So I think if I could try to, for just a second, try to represent some of the really good builders here in the state of Colorado, you're up against when a modular home is getting delivered, its destination is staying parked for the most part. It's sometimes they get up and they move down the road again. A tiny home, at the end of the day, it can go from California to New York. It's got to travel. And your focus is to ensure that you're not causing issues on the highway, on the roads. There's a lot of things to think about as a builder. There's a lot of liabilities. There's a lot of safety to think about. But at the end of the day, what does all that mean? Is there a standard operating procedure? Is there a standard way to build these homes that's going to help make everybody feel safe and satisfy those requirements? The inspections, I agree. That's a conversation. I think that, and I'm a nobody, but I'm just saying, I think the inspection conversation is like, would come after what we, identify, how are we building these? I can tell you right now, I know there's builders out there in the tiny home world that don't do ridge beams, snow load. We live in Colorado where snow load is it's a necessity. There's other areas, you could say Tennessee, just as an example, they don't have a snow load. That doesn't mean they don't have requirements for, a pitch of a roof and that type of stuff. But in the tiny home world, when you build these homes, you're building, at the end of the day, you're building out of 2x4s, or you're doing still framing, it's still 2x4. And in doing that standard operating procedure that I'm going to kind of get back to, there's a way you can build these homes to meet all requirements. You can't put an electrical box in a 2x3 wall. And NFPA 1192, it's fantastic when it comes to the mobility of a tiny home, to how it has to get up and down the road. It's fantastic as a plumber, and I can't remember who was representing plumbing on here. You got to forgive me. I couldn't remember if it was John or McGee, James. But so as a plumber, as a tiny builder, all of your plumbing has to be readily accessible, meaning I need to be able to get to it at the turn of a screw, at the lift of a lid, whatever the case might be. I should be able to access it right away. So from a plumbing standpoint, I don't know why anybody in the tiny home world would put their plumbing in a wall. Okay. There's a good chance of it freezing. But that's another conversation for another day. It does pertain to construction of tiny homes. But that, I think, in that realm, to do an inspection would be a piece of cake if it's accessible. Electrical, that's the one that's a little bit tricky. The wires are supposed to be in the wall, and you can't put wires in a 2x3 wall. So what's the most minimum framing you can achieve? It's 2x4s. In a tiny home, you can't really get away with using 2x6s. You can't. You might throw them up on the rafters if you're not using a ridge beam. That's a conversation. But at the end of the day, a 24-foot house, back to Janine talking about the houses blowing over in the wind. A 24-foot house could weigh 12,000 pounds. That's going to be a little tricky to blow over in the wind. I'm just saying, it takes a little bit of effort for that to happen. And then we get back and there's this conversation I hear of people talking about chassis. And when I think of chassis, I think of motorhomes. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a definition or whatnot to why we use the word chassis. But I've been on both sides of the spectrum when I've seen somebody build on a RV trailer and try to put the weight of a home on it. And I've seen the floors blow out. I've seen the axles bend. I've seen what happens when it's not done correctly. And I've seen what happens when you build on a trailer that's engineered and simply put to hold the weight of a home. So in the tiny house world, the trailer is the foundation. And that's just in our realm. That is the foundation. You're only as good as your foundation. The home is put onto this foundation with the anticipation it's never coming off. In reality, you could hook up on the D-rings and lift with a crane from the chassis, from the trailer, from the foundation, and it's all one unit. It's not bending, it's not flexing. There's no weak spots, meaning you don't have to have dead support here and there. There are people that do develop lots that pour footers, put piers, and get hold downs. And that's a conversation for where it's parked for foundations. But at the end of the day, the tiny home world, these guys want to be able to park their home somewhere and feel like they're achieving law, right? They're not doing it illegally. But I also want to unhook, in a timely manner if there's a fire or a flood, or I want to go to vacation in Florida. So it's like, how do we achieve that? But I mean, there is a right trailer, there is a wrong trailer. That is a conversation in itself. But when it comes to IRC, NFPA 1192, they complement each other. You can't have one without the other. So I guess in my perspective, just my experience, it's like I would assume the conversation was to create a standard operating procedure. Does it end up being a, where you're pulling from one book, to another, code? Is this all become one, are we rewriting a new book or whatever the case might be? But again, 2x4 framing, it sets you up to meet requirements for electrical. In the tiny home world, you don't put P-traps underneath the trailer. So in regards to your P-traps freezing underneath because you don't have a crawl space, it's not, but again, that falls back to NFPA 1192. So I don't want to ramble on or anything. I just in IRC, when you put a window in, and your window's over 2 foot, you step up your header size, right? I can tell you NFPA 1192 does not cover framing. And it's always been a huge pet peeve of mine. There are people that try to get away with doing less, save costs. I couldn't tell you why, because I don't want to know why. What I hope happens.
I'm gonna jump in, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
No, I appreciate it. You had a lot to share, a lot to get off your chest. I hope it was therapeutic for you. It was for me. But and you're not nobody, by the way. You're Tracy Manchego Baker's husband. I'm kidding. I'm messing with you. That was a lot of good stuff. Thank you so much. A lot of ground to cover. Obviously, you've touched upon a lot of areas we're going to have to address. Concerning your question about, whether we pull pieces of different things that work or we start wholesale on our own, I'm more of a fan of the former, right? Taking what's already out there and putting it together for Colorado. But that's ultimately up to you guys to take us on the direction that makes the most sense. And ultimately, it has to make ultimate sense to the State Housing Board, right? So keep those thinking hats on about what direction to take, where to pull from, and how to create something for Colorado specific. But thank you. I had to land that plane because we've got about 40 or so minutes before we have to transition to something else. And there are a few hands that are still up, and I'd like to get to those people. Robin, I don't know if you still had your hand up from the prior discussion, but your hand has been up for a while. There we go. Thank you. I think Donnie was next. Oh, sorry. John was next, but he put his hand up. John McGee. And yes, Austin, John McGee is our plumbing guy. James is our electrical guy. John Meyer, a different John, is a modular builder. So 2 Johns on the TAC. John McGee, please proceed, sir.
Sure, I was just gonna go back to installation and stuff at factories and stuff. That won't be our regular, that's up to Mo and his people to determine how they're gonna make their requirements. We need to just see the verification from the Division of Housing when we get to the site. So we see something that says that. So it's not that we have to see that they're licensed or whatever. That's gonna be up to Mo. You know, that's gonna be what we decide on how they want to do their inspections, right, Mo?
Well said, sir. Thank you for
So
that.
that's, I just wanted to add that. And that's for plumbing, and electrical, both.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Donnie.
Thank you. I just real quick, before we end today's session, are we gonna possibly break into smaller groups to work on offline about the construction standards and the type
We
of
had that
construction?
discussion on the first day and the TAC elected to proceed with the full group for now.
Okay.
So that is option on the table when the TAC feels that we reached that point. Or we think they have reached that point and they might want to listen to our suggestion, then we'll have that discussion. But for now, the TAC has decided to keep everybody together.
Okay, so for today's discussion about the construction standards of tiny homes, I know that Eric has mentioned, chassis, people are mentioning insulation, plumbing, electrical issues, but we kind of been bouncing around different areas. Is there some
Correct.
key points that we would like to touch on moving forward so we can better prepare for that meeting moving forward? Because it just keeps bouncing around and not really too sure what we're going to focus on.
I agree. I think we're going to have to provide some direction here. So we'll be working offline to put something together to frame it for everybody.
Okay.
A great point. Yes, it was obvious from the first 5 minutes I was on the call, and I missed the first 30. So, Nathan, I don't know why I'm calling you Nathan all of a sudden. Nate. Oh, your hand was up. All right, that was a remnant. Am I missing anybody else? Apologies, I'm bouncing around from screen to screen here. I don't see any other hands up. Byron, you've been awfully silent. Is there anything you would like to share?
There. I have been silent. I've been listening intently and loving a lot of what I'm hearing. And I think I agree with you, Mo, that we're going to have more focus on the construction techniques, which was the main focus today. And we went all over the board. The construction techniques are not as complicated as a lot of you may think, because we have, we've been building these things for a long time and none of them have blown over. None of them have fallen down. None of mine or Austin's have blown over or fallen down. And a lot of us know how to build them. And so it's kind of, I think, having the TAC kind of understand how the building techniques are for tiny homes. It's not any different than a standard home, with the exception we're just on a movable foundation for the most part. That's with people like respectable builders such as Austin and myself and a number of other people. And so it's not that complicated is what I want to say. And I think that's really all I need to say. Thank you for calling me in.
Yeah, of course, Byron, and well said. And that's music to my ears. The less complicated it can be, the better. But let's definitely go through it and see where the journey takes us. But it has to have some focus, folks. So we'll be working offline, as I mentioned. Sam, Donnie, myself, we'll pull in a couple of people. We'll be communicating individually with people, because you'll later learn, TAC members, about the open meetings law. And you'll hear from your attorney about that. So we will contact you to have those discussions. Please do not contact each other to have those discussions. Okay. That was excellent discussion. I really appreciate it. But with that being said, it would be helpful to receive from people, and you don't have to be a TAC member. You can be Byron, Dan, Brad, anyone else, right? Robin, and weigh in. So there's something, if you think there's, for Byron's example that he just used, he's doing it a certain way today, right? If you want to submit to us what you are doing today, right? And explain to us why you think that's the appropriate way of doing it, we would love to see it. Right? If you are doing it a certain way and you think it's a good way, but you've identified holes, right, that need to be shored up, then this is an opportunity to do that. So get those submissions to us. I think the last time we had a meeting, I asked for people to provide, their thoughts on construction standards, and I got zero. I got updates on ASTM and stuff like that. So we tapped Tracy to kind of kickstart this discussion for us, right? But we would love to hear from you. That's what this is all about, right? And for those modular folks, you guys know this, but for the tiny home folks, it's obviously all very new to you. Keep the lines of communication open. It has to come through us though, in order to get to the rest of the TAC. But we can't do that without receiving it from you. And if you sent me something 6 months ago, it's buried. So I need you to restart and get that to me as soon as possible so we can prepare for our next meeting to be more effective on the 29th after Thanksgiving. Okay. And I definitely want to, oh, sorry. So I saw a hand go up and disappear real quick. I don't know who it was.
It's Byron.
Yes,
Am I
Byron.
still on?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. I would invite anyone that would like to come and see how we build. We're going to start another tiny home sometime, hopefully next week. Well, Thanksgiving is going to mess us up. We'll find out if we start next week. But the week after Thanksgiving, we'll have a tiny home under construction. You know, I can provide you all kinds of information, but as Eric will attest, he brought his team up to see, or down to see us. Coming and seeing what we do is proof positive of what reality is, instead of just sending you pictures and ideas that will take you anywhere you want to imagine. But coming and seeing that we're actually building a real home that's to standards that are acceptable in my mind, and Austin and Tracy's mind, they're acceptable in many other people's minds. We're building the real deal. And so if you want to come up in the next week or after Thanksgiving, you're welcome to. We'll be building it for a while, but when we start building, we go pretty quickly. So the walls will start getting enclosed by, well, the electrician doesn't come until the 2nd of December. So sometime in the second week of December, we'll start enclosing walls, hopefully. But so come on up and to Lions. Lions is a delightful spot, and it's got lots of nice spots to eat now, and see what we do.
That's awesome, Byron.
Then the fear disappears.
What's that?
The fear disappears then.
The fear disappears then. I like it. Well done, sir.
As
I
you
was
come
hoping
to see the fears. Right.
That's right. I was hoping actually you would volunteer for that, because James and a few other TAC members expressed interest in a field trip at the last TAC meeting. I was going to reach out to you about it, but I was really hoping you would volunteer for us to tour your site. Our next meeting is scheduled to be, excuse me, on the 29th. Would that be a good timing for you to be able to host us, since we already have that scheduled? It'll be noticed to the public. So that does mean, Byron, just so you know, that where the TAC goes, if anyone from the public is also interested in observing them, do their business, they can also show up. So just keep in mind that the invitation to TAC is an invitation to the public.
The 29th probably will not be real developed yet, but
okay,
let me tune into you next week and see. We've got 2 different projects going right now, and let me see if we start framing that as I project. I've had some people down sick and not feeling well, so my normal schedule's not moving like it normally does, but I believe the 29th could be possible. Yes, let's talk about that next week.
that's fair, Byron. I appreciate that. We'll have an agenda planned if we're as a backup to have construction standard discussions remotely. But yeah, if we can make that work for 29th, great. If not, the next meeting after that is December 6th. So just keep one of those 2 dates in mind and let us know what works better. Yes, Mike, a big coffee pot ready for Byron, and I can bring the donuts. Yes, I'll bring the donuts. That's fair. It's very fair.
How about bagels instead?
I'm with you. I'd rather have a bagel too. I'll bring bagels and donuts and coffee. How about that?
Okay, sounds great.
Whichever.
And I'll have a
date
house
we
for you to
pick.
look at.
Awesome. That's even more important. Great. And we'll try not to mess up your construction site or the house you're working on by dropping bagel crumbs and spilling coffee all over the place.
Not worried about it.
Awesome. Really appreciate that, Byron. Thank you so much. Sean, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I just want to say I would look forward to seeing how the tiny homes are built. I don't think anybody on the TAC believes that these homes are not built well and structured well. I think what we just need to kind of, in my opinion, just need to kind of focus down on picking whether the industry supplies a specific, set of plans, codes, whatever, or whether we pick something like IRC or whatever, and we kind of focus down into what adaptations we need to make to those codes or to those plans to make it work for all participants. I think that'd be, just my opinion, to be the most constructive way to kind of start with something and then kind of modify it into what will work, because this is all new ground for everybody.
Well said. And really thinking, as we go through this, think short term, but also long term, right? We need to get something in sooner rather than later to help the tiny home industry flourish in Colorado, help provide some, relief, if you will, to the consumers who are interested in them, but also those local jurisdictions that don't know what to do with them, right? And of course, let's not forget DORA electrical and plumbing boards as well, right? But think short term, what can we cobble together? And when I say cobble, I don't mean sloppily, right? What can we put together that will work? But also thinking about the future as the tiny home industry works towards accomplishing specific standards for its product, nationally, internationally, whatever, right? So just we'll be operating two paths. And I'm just a reminder again, what we present, when I say we, I mean you, present to the State Housing Board in the form of proposed rules is not the end of it, right? The modular folks can tell you, we revisit rules all the time. So if we get it, it may not be perfect, right? But we need to get it to get some traction, right? So we're shooting for March 30th. We'll propose it to the State Housing Board for considerations rulemaking hearing. Whatever it adopts becomes final as final rules, as permanent rules, I should say. But that's not the end of the journey, right? We can revisit to see how it's working and make tweaks as necessary. And if we identify some really huge issues that we cannot address because we don't have the statutory authority to do so, but this body feels that it should be addressed in some fashion, more legislatively, then we can have that discussion as well, right? Tim, you got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mo. I respect being able to get a field trip. I'm not sure I'd be able to make that, but I'll try if I can. But my one comment is, so the whole concept, and I know we got way late a bit today, but we'll be revisiting the next meeting, is construction techniques, from the companies and how they build these structures. My primary job is doing plan review with my jurisdiction, both mostly commercial, but on residential. It would be really helpful to me to see a set of plans, which I'm assuming you do, not necessarily from a framing side of things. They're probably not, with a structural engineer, but there's going to be a framing plan and some details on how that's working, based on whatever the loads, both lateral loads, snow loads. Been a lot of discussion about both of those, which along the Front Range, we get the wind loads. Up in the mountains and areas, we do get the snow load issues where these structures are going to be going and are going now. And then how are we going to meet the energy code? Because I know Mo talked a bit about the energy code legislation. So how you either are complying with those or engineer plan? Because I think that might be part of what we're given direction to come up with as part of the standard, if I'm not mistaken, Mo.
Absolutely. Sorry, and there was some background noise. If folks aren't speaking, if you could please mute, that'd be greatly appreciated. And I was trying to use the mute feature myself to mute somebody and I couldn't do it. So I've lost my power. But yes, Tim, the energy code is definitely something we're going to have to consider as well. But we'll go into more of that later. And I think you set the table well there with regard to the field trip. You're absolutely right. I think it would be helpful, Byron, if you're up for it, and I see your hand up here, it would be helpful to see the plans for the very structure that we're going to see, right? It'd also be helpful to see, if you have such a thing, your QA manual or process, right? And how you ensure that what you're building is to the plans. So it'd be good to see that whole process from beginning to end, right? And if you can walk us through it, if you're willing and able to do that. We're not gonna be there to criticize. We want to be there to take from it and learn from it and see how we can put something together for Colorado. If that makes sense. And your hand is up. So Byron, thoughts on that?
I would be happy to send you a set of plans that we sell to DIYers. I will say they are not in near the detail you're used to seeing, because it's not been necessary for us to provide all the information about snow loads and things of that nature, because we don't have any building departments we've been answering to. I look forward to the day that I might be able to be in that position, where I can actually submit them to a building department and they're going to go, yeah, this is hot, this is cool. So I'll send over a set of plans to Mo that he could distribute to you all. It's one, like I said, it's what we sell to DIYers through the internet. So yeah.
That'd be great, but it'd be really helpful to see the plans for the very home.
Right.
That we're going to be being built. Yes.
Okay, the one that's to be built doesn't have very detailed plans. It's just a basic framing plans.
Okay, got it. Okay.
But I can send those over to you as well. I'll send you it's very basic framing plans, because we have done this so many times that we don't need all the blah, blah, blah stuff that is required. I'm not saying that it's not important, but it's just the framing plan is all we need.
Okay.
To do what we do.
Okay, fair enough.
Go forward,
and I'm just going to make a tweak, a modification to the dates I proposed. And others feel free if that's an issue. I definitely want to respect Janine time, and she seemed like she was very interested in the site visit. And she's going to be unavailable on the 6th of December because she's working with the Colorado chapter of the ICC. So I would love to have her there if that's something you're interested in. So the dates I would propose are either the 29th or December 20th, whichever works better for you, Byron, between those two dates. Janine, do you want to add anything to that?
And I appreciate that, Mo, but my back surgery is going to be the running qualifier on whether I can get out and do anything at all. So
that's fair.
More than the chapter meeting. So I've got to have back surgery on the 30th. So I don't know if I'm going to get 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or what it's going to be, or 2 days.
So fair enough. So it's either the 29th or bust. Just kidding. It's 29th or anything. Okay.
Everyone doesn't have to come at the very same time, as far as I'm concerned. I know that you have kind of like government in the sunshine that you need to do things like that. But if there's, it could be 2 different visitations if necessary, or whatever is convenient for Janine, because I know she's got a ways to drive. So, I'm a flexitarian. I work with y'all.
You got a few memorable quotes in 30 seconds, my friend. Government sunshine and flexitarian. I've never heard of either of those. Those are brilliant.
Also, I overstand things instead of understanding them. If I've related to them a lot, you're gonna like overstand once you get a relationship with it.
That's awesome. Fair enough. Very good. You raise a good point. If people can't make the first one, we can schedule another one. Just once again, committee members, you'll learn more about this in 18 minutes. If two or more of you present, we'll have to notice that meeting, but we can cross that bridge when we get there. Or as a friend of a friend describes it, we'll burn that bridge once we get there. All right. Anyone else? Oh, Byron, you still have your hands up. Is there anything else that you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. Thank you for putting it down. I'm scanning. Donnie.
Yeah, just real quick, even if we were not able to attend the actual site visit, I think a set of plans would actually help with the construction standards discussion, especially when we do talk about energy code, because my thoughts are, even with the tiny homes, they're so small, you probably don't need as much heating and insulation as you would a typical home. So if we see what a typical tiny home looks like, construction wise, we could probably compare it to any standards that we currently have and see if it would work the way it's currently set up.
I have something I can share on that. When Eric brought his department here to inspect our place, I believe it was his head inspector knows the whole issue on how to work with those energy codes and said our places would be just fine on that. Also, Dan Fitzpatrick and Brad Wiseman has a lot of information on that, how since we have high altitude closed cell foam that's sprayed, which is the most dense spray foam there is, and we have Alpine windows, the very best windows made in the United States in our houses. You know, it's hard to close our doors sometimes. Okay, so the houses are basically hermetically sealed envelopes, but there's ways to, like I said, Eric's head inspector and Dan and Brad have a lot of information on that where we can pass the energy codes without too much issue, from what I understand. Even with a
Great.
2x4 rafter.
All right. Mike had an interesting comment in the chat to accommodate Janine and others that can't make it. I actually like that suggestion. Can we make part of it remote? And this is an interesting opportunity to potentially kill two birds with one stone. Robin, would you be available to participate at our site visit and provide a remote tour, if you will, for Janine and anyone else, so we can see how some of your process may actually work in real time? Robin, are you still there? Oh, is Robin not even on anymore? Well, that's a bummer. Looks like he dropped off. I'll have a site.
Robin is out of state.
Correct.
But it's important enough that maybe he'll make that trip.
Bingo. You got it.
It's kind of important.
Well, it depends on how he looks at it, but it's an opportunity. That's how I see it. I'll follow up with him. But of course, if anybody else wants to follow up with him, they can as well. Is there any other? Oh, yeah, Mike's volunteering to do it if Robin can't do it. We might have to take you up on that, Mike. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so Byron, if you just let us know, timing wise, what works for you, if you can send us the plans for the very product you will see, and as well as like you said, what you provide online to the DYIers, that'd be a great place for us to start. Any other? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And Tim mentioned the Oscar Blues for lunch.
There's better places.
There's better places.
Than Oscar
Yeah.
Blues.
Well,
it depends on if the high school kid that washes dishes is to cook that day or not.
Well, we'll trust the local person's recommendations. For those of us that work for the state government, though, we'll be refraining from having alcoholic beverages. But anywhere that has great food, we would be up for. All right. Good discussion, folks. We still have some time before our attorney joins us, and then we have to have a motion to move in executive session. That's all going to happen in about 10 minutes. Is there anything else folks wanted to chat about for the next 10 minutes before we do that? Just open it up. Anything. Talk about anything, since we didn't quite get everything we want to get done today. James.
All right. Hey, Mo, when we were discussing, you mentioned the standards that we want to review for the builds. Electrical wise, it would be easy to follow the the state statutes for electrical installation, which would be the most current NEC, and that has to each county has to adopt that within 1 year after the new current code book comes out. So that's what all electricians install to in this state, that standard.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, James. And for those that are new to our modular program, that is the one code where we have some, exceptions, but we also adopt what the state electrical board adopts as well. We also have a grace period, if you will, for our manufacturers before they have to completely switch over to it. So when the electrical board went from 2017 to 2020, that automatically happened for us as well. But our manufacturers had a grace period. So just something to think about as we talk about tiny homes as well. Once again, for those tiny home folks, I would recommend between now and the next meeting, really taking a close look at our administrative rules and how they apply to modular, right? There could be a lot you could learn from that to help really frame your standards that we're going to be working on. Something to think about. So James, thanks for bringing that up.
No problem.
John, you want to share anything about plumbing? You're on mute, sir.
Couldn't find the microphone, lost it in the bottom. So, yeah, bear in mind that we are using the IRC and the IPC as far as code, but it's Colorado code. There's a lot of amendments to that. I think you guys are on the 2018 IRC, right? Is that what you use for your manufactured homes? Right.
Yeah, our modular products are 2018 IRC. That's correct.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, that part of it is left up to your division as far as those types of regulations on those homes built there. So you're not necessarily on the Colorado code. You're on the IRC, was what you adopt, which is at the factory. Once it gets on site, then anything on site has to meet with the Colorado plumbing code that's installed on site. That's about how it goes.
Yeah. Thanks for that reminder too, John. So just keep that in mind, folks, as we're progressing through this. We're talking about the construction of the structure. We're talking about the foundation and whether or not it's being attached to it and how so, whether it's permanent or not. But those electrical and plumbing connections that are done at the site and everything else on the site is outside of our jurisdiction. So just something to keep in mind. So there's definitely a dance that we have to do here. Where we have to kind of make this fit as best as possible, as smoothly as possible with the local jurisdiction process, but also DORA's electrical and plumbing board process. So just something to keep in mind as well. So John and James, if you guys think of anything from your statutes and rules, that'd be helpful for our discussion when we kind of get to that point. By all means, share that and then help guide us through that so we all understand what it means and what the implications are. Good stuff. And Dan and Brad, I think you're both out of state as well. Hopefully you can join us for a road trip. Justin, I know you're out of state too. Might be a tough ask. Of course, the folks in Nebraska on the modular side might be a tough ask, but hopefully you guys can make it. And of course, Sean being out in the Western Slope, extreme Western Slope, damn near Utah, that might be a tough ask as well. But hopefully all could make it. The invitation is out there, thanks to Byron, and we'll go from there. Donnie, you had your hand up.
Just real quick, typically when these tiny homes are built, or these homes that you're building, I guess Byron would probably be the best one to answer this. Are you building them 100%? There's nothing that needs to be completed on site?
Everything is done here. We have a licensed plumber that comes in and a licensed electrician that comes in that we do not do ourselves. But everything's done on site, yes, except for skirting and setting, of course.
Okay, and is that typical for the tiny house industry? That by the time the structure leaves the factory, it's 100% complete, and nothing needs to be done to it?
I think that is safe to assume, although there are those that sometimes we will build a shell for a DIYer, and they will finish building it, or we will build, it's very rare that we do that. 95% of our tiny homes are 100% complete when they leave here. There is the rare occasion that we do something for a DIYer that they can complete.
I was just wondering, just because, with the modular portion, we do have AC items. But we'll get into that later, I'm guessing.
Yeah, even for, AC as far as air conditioning, heating and stuff like that.
No. Donnie, that's
AC,
never
Oh,
use an
AC.
acronym, Donnie, without explaining it first. Lesson number 1. So now you get a chance to redo it. Explain to Byron what AC means.
Yeah, so AC items currently, how we have it defined, are items that are to be completed at the final destination that were not completed at the factory for compliance of that structure. So AC stands for alternative construction, which I believe we'll have more discussions about because it's a little confusing, because in the IRC, alternative construction means it's an alternate way to construct something. So yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but typically most builders of tiny homes is plug and play when they roll off.
Yeah, that's the beauty about your product. It's going to make it simpler for us in regards to site work to complete the structure, because that is a very confusing area that we will unpack further on the modular side if once we get to that point.
It also makes it really nice for neighborhoods because they don't have to deal with construction noise for months and months and months. It just shows up, it gets set, and there's no noise for the most part, except for everyone hooting and hollering with joy.
Well, I can't wait to be hooting and hollering at your plants here soon.
There's nothing to see that's very nice, but we do good work anyway.
That's good stuff.
And like I said, I'm sure Tracy and Austin are the same. There's 4 reputable builders in the state: Rocky Mountain, Mitchcraft, Tracy, and Austin and us. Be careful of the other ones, especially the one in Inglewood.
Yeah, I think we've all seen the news feed on that.
Yeah.
And just a reminder, and I think maybe I didn't cover this in the first meeting. The legislator has given us enforcement tools, right? Doesn't mean we use them immediately, right? We try to work with people, and you can talk to the manufacturers, the sellers, and the installers from the modular side that are on this call. Not to mention Tony Payton, executive director for the Rocky Mountain Home Association. So we try to work with you first. But if it's clear to us that that's not gaining any traction, then we'll start going through our quiver, if you will, and make sure we get your attention, because ultimately we're trying to protect the public. So that's the beauty about this program as well. It's going to bring some accountability that might be missing here as well as part of the puzzle. So more work to be done in that area as well. And we'll get to that. That'll be part of our discussion once we get through the construction and installation standards. So just keep that in mind as well. And just so you know, I'm going to start casting a wider net for these discussions. So right now they're cozy, they're intimate, very manageable. We're going to start casting a much wider net and start looking for other folks, in particular, all the building jurisdictions, right, to be involved in these conversations. So that way it really helps with the education outreach part of this, which I think Margarita mentioned in one of the chats, which is an extremely important piece of this. So if we can get them in earlier in the discussion, the better. Same with all the manufacturers. So I'm going off a list provided to me by Representative Kip and Eric Freed to start these first two meetings, but I'm going to expand on that. And I actually added a few other people too that came to my attention, including the very entity that you mentioned, Byron and Englewood. Unfortunately, they haven't participated, but they've actually been invited. And I will continue inviting parties, and so will Sam when he takes over for me. If they want to participate, that's our process. It's open. We want it to be engaging as well. But just a warning, as we get, into the hundreds of people potentially, probably not, but potentially, the side chatter may have to be limited, and we may have to focus on the TAC members having a conversation. And we just kind of see how that works from there. So apologies in advance if it's not as interactive as the first two meetings, but we really do need to get through the work ultimately. And of course, you can always submit things to us in writing in advance of a meeting or right after a meeting. Okay. And I think I've killed enough time. Is Mike on here? Our attorney? No, wrong Mike. Sorry, our attorney, Mike Kolarczyk. Maybe you're an attorney too, Mike Schmidt, but I'm looking for
No, not today.
our mic is on. All right, so perfect timing. I'm going to pull up a motion and have one of you read. Sorry, I'm going to read, and I just need one of you to move. And by one of you, I mean the TAC members, and then the second TAC member to second. And then I will call, I'll go through the roll call of each of the members and get your vote. And then hopefully we'll have 10 people that voted in favor. And then we'll move into executive session. Now I just got to find that motion for Mike. Give me 1 second. Mike, I can't find that motion.
Mo, do you want me to read it? I have it open right here.
Yeah, please do, if you could.
Okay, so I'll read it, and then if someone could so move it. So I move pursuant to section 24-6-402-3A2 of the Colorado Revised Statutes to adjourn the public portion of this meeting and to move into executive session for the purpose of receiving legal advice from the Technical Advisory Committee's lawyer concerning the Colorado Open Records Act and open meetings law.
Moved.
Second.
We need. All right. So we're gonna do the vote. Jeff's not here. Justin, how do you vote? Oh, he typed it in. Yeah. All right. So we have one in the affirmative. Janine.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
I don't think Mark Lindsay is on. Sumit, you still on?
Sumit left.
Oh, he left. James.
Agree, yes.
John McGee, that is.
Yes.
John Meyer.
Yes.
I don't think Mike Morrow is on. Sean.
Yes.
Nate. Did we lose Nate? Tracy.
Yes.
Margarita.
Yes.
I think we need Nate. He's our 10th. Did you count 9 there, Mike? I counted 9.
How many members are on the board currently?
There are 14. We are appointed a new one who's going to join us on the 6th. Sorry, on 29th.
We do need 10. We need a
I know, I
2/3 vote of the
thought so.
entire
I
membership.
thought so. He was just literally on here. Let me call him. Hang on.
I just texted him, FYI. He's coming back on through chat.
Nate, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to vote on going to executive session. You need to unmute.
Yeah, I just saw Nate's message. We have the
Okay.
votes.
I voted yes. Okay.
Yep. Thank you, Nate. So we've got our 10, Mike.
Okay, great. So everyone should have received a second Zoom link, I believe.
Yep.
So since we voted to adjourn the public session, everyone should close out of this link, open the new one. If anyone doesn't have it, let Mo know now.
Exactly. All right. We'll see you in the other one, other room.
Oh, I'll stop the recording too.